name's Elaine Scollin. I am standing in an area bordering one of the most spectacular old-growth forests in British Columbia. No, this isn't the Carmana Valley, but some of the trees here are just as old, some species even bigger. This little-known area has been called the Lost Forest, and it boasts of having some of the tallest and largest trees in BC, and in some cases North America. It's also one of the last fragments and best examples of low-level coastal temperate rainforests left in this province. Water and life are abundant here. It is home to many old-growth dependent species of animals and birds, like the spotted owl and a rare seabird called the marbled murrelet. Researchers say that these species can only survive in an old-growth forest. But besides the record-sized trees and the islands of biodiversity, this area has one other major selling point. It produces millions of liters of fresh, cold water every day for a population of 1.7 million people, just 20 minutes away in the lower mainland of metropolitan Vancouver.
When you have a huge supply of good water, you keep it that way. You don't try and disturb it when you've got a system that makes for good drinking water for a massive population.
Greater Vancouver's drinking water comes from 3 separate valley systems and catchment basins called watersheds, measuring 585 square kilometers. Looking towards the North Shore Mountains, they lie pretty well side by side, stretching east from the Capilano watershed at the base of Grouse Mountain to the Seymour and then to the Coquitlam watershed on the east side of Indian Arm. We should consider ourselves very lucky because there aren't many cities left in the world with a forest so close that provides such a secure source of high-quality fresh water. However, our water doesn't always meet national and provincial health standards. In fact, there's been controversy over the quality of Vancouver's drinking water. Health concerns have prompted the GVRD, the Greater Vancouver Regional District, the organization that manages our forest and water resources, to make plans to build a filtration and disinfection system that could cost taxpayers up to $500 million over the next 10 years.
We're looking at maybe in the future to do some filtration. We're trying to avoid that because of the cost. It's probably close to $400 million to do Seymour and Capilano. If we go with all the improvements that are in it, we'll probably double the cost of water, which is running about $110 a single-family household now. It depends on which municipality, but that's the average. It'll go up to about $230 by the end of the decade.
One of the biggest problems we face is when our water turns cloudy or turbid after heavy rains in the winter, spring, and fall. Well, those rains wash sediment and organic materials from the water catchment areas into our reservoirs. High levels of suspended particles in our drinking water are a danger to us because they may contain disease-causing microorganisms that make disinfection more difficult. The GVRD says this sediment occurs naturally, but there's a growing concern that the natural factors are not the only cause. Many people believe road building and clear-cut logging in the watershed are major factors contributing to the reduced quality of our drinking water. According to professional forester and old-growth expert Herb Hammond, we already have a superior water filtration system in place, the old-growth forest.
The intact forest system acts like a great big sponge, and particularly the older the forest, the better the sponge. So because you have accumulated more decaying wood in the form of fallen trees on the forest floor, it's also cold and damp down there, so decay occurs relatively slowly in that system, and the system acts like a large sponge to hold water and slowly release it. The most stable forests that exist on the West Coast, indeed the most stable forests that exist throughout British Columbia, are old-growth forests because they have the best diversity of specialized organisms in them, from insects that eat other insects that eat trees, to beneficial fungi that are associated with the roots of these trees that repel root-decaying fungi and provide physical barriers. So they're very stable ecosystems. So you have very, very pure water that's produced from them. Because of those situations, if your goal is to provide high-quality water timed well throughout the year, then you should stay out of the forest and let it produce water. There's no way that human beings can improve that function. All we can do is degrade it.
The forests in the watersheds have already been fragmented by road building and clear-cut logging. These aerial pictures reveal a checkerboard of cut blocks in many valleys of the watershed, some bordering lakes and crossing streams. Much of the valley bottoms have already been logged. Over 6,000 hectares were logged before the watersheds were protected by law in the 1920s. And since 1961, about 4,000 hectares have been clear-cut. This means that over 10,000 hectares of old growth have already been logged in this century, more than 25 times the size of Stanley Park. Add to this the loss of forest from building over 300 kilometers of logging and access roads since the early 60s, and we find that almost 45% of the forest land base that is economically feasible to log has already been cut. We talked to professional forester Mark Waring, who for 21 years worked for the BC Forest Service and now works for the Western Canada Wilderness Committee. We asked him to explain the dangers of logging in regards to water quality.
The first thing that happens is that a logging road has to be built into the logging site, and that is, in fact, the major problem. The logging roads are the major source of the extra sediment that is getting into our reservoirs and our drinking water supply areas. You simply cannot avoid causing huge increases in soil erosion when you build these logging roads across the steep slopes. They then, of course, follow that up by clear cutting a patch. They're currently around 5 to 10 hectares in extent. They have been up to 15 or 20 hectares in the past. That in turn increases the risk of slope failures, mudslides occurring within the clear cut. What the data shows from the scientific record is that there may be increases up to 400% or more from the background level of erosion as a result of building roads and clear cutting, and that of the incremental erosion, about 3/4 of it is due to the roads, and another 25% is due to erosion extra erosion that's coming off the clear cuts themselves.
Dr. Michael Feller from the Forest Sciences Department at the University of British Columbia has spent 20 years studying the impacts of logging on water quality in the Lower Mainland and 10 years conducting forest ecology research in the watersheds.
Often you can see landslides in clear-cut areas indicating that they are cutting on slopes which are potentially unstable. And you can see some scout-out stream channels occurring in clear cuts. These are areas where all the debris which was in a stream, all the logs that were there, everything's been flushed downstream along with a lot of sediment and soil. And this situation, of course, is not very good for water quality.
A lot of things happen when you clear cut a forest by comparison to its natural functioning. To deal with a few important ones that address water, is that right away you get rid of a huge plant community. And that plant community has been storing and recycling nutrients. So suddenly you have a flush of nutrients into the system, so that the nutrients no longer are being taken up by the plants and the diverse, luxuriant kind of plant community. So they get flushed into the water courses. Those nutrients can create favorable situations for unwanted biological activity in watersheds used for human use.